When we went into Iran in 1953 and installed the Shah, yes, there was blowback. The reaction to that was the taking of our hostages, and that persists. And if we ignore that at our own risk. That if we think that we can do what we want around the world and not incite hatred, then we have a problem. They don't come here to attack us because we're rich and we're free. They come and they attack us because we're over there. I mean, what would we think if we were, if other foreign countries were doing that to us?
Why did Fox News not treat Ron Paul better when he's been talking about this stuff for the past 8 years?
Look, that's to the Republicans, and one of my favorites, Congressman Ron Paul from Texas. I got to say, just as an observer, a relatively new voice in the political conversation these past couple of years, I look at the Republican field, I see, you know, Palin, Bachman, Pawlenty, Mitt Romney, some interesting people, some smart people in that mix. There's no way any of them are better than you for the Republican nomination. Let's just be, seriously. No, I mean, and when you look at your articulation of the actual, I'm not saying your answers are all right. I don't know whether your answers are all right or not. But I do know the way that you frame the debate around the issues that this country faces is the most honest of almost any politician that I deal with. Do you not have an obligation at this point to run for president?
Well, some have argued that case. I thank you for the compliment.
Well, you know, listen, I'm going to harass you on this one because we need the debate. The debate, you have the framing of the debate, as you know, is everything, and you do that so effectively, Congressman. Thank you for the time.
He's hugely popular. He wins our FoxNews.com live polls. People felt that he was the top man in the political debate that we had. We have Congressman Ron Paul from the great state of Texas here. We've got our live chat here on FoxNews.com is blowing up. We have so many supporters on here. Like we said, you hands down won the debate with the viewers here. And they have Bill saying that you are how intelligent you are. Robert is saying this man just tells it like it is, and we need that. They feel that you're someone that speaks directly to them. You're not hiding any of the facts. You lay it out there. And there's many people that agree with you. You've had an incredible career, both as a physician and as a congressman. Why do you think that you are so hugely popular? I mean, not only with Tea Party supporters, but a lot of the electorate that really feel impassioned about your candidacy.
Well, I ask a lot of questions. I try to figure it out. I don't quite understand it. But I think it's the people who feel like they've been left out. A lot of people who come up to me are enthusiastic. They heard me in the debates 4 years ago, and they say, "Oh, you sounded pretty good." But when I really got excited was I checked your voting record, and you actually voted that way. And I think it was the credibility gained from that, and it's especially true with young people. And I try to lay it out on the line with them about how bad it's going to be, and yet they get enthusiastic and believe there are answers, and the answers can be found in something I think is wonderful, you know, our Constitution, limited government, and get the dependency off government. We can't depend on the government to take care of us, and it's well received by young people. So where are you going to cut? That's the big thing. We're back to that. My proposal, both because I believe in it as well as I think it's good politics, and that is look at our overseas expenditures. All the money that we spend, it is estimated now we spend over $1 trillion managing our foreign policy, and I don't believe for a minute we're safer for it. So we could cut hundreds of billions of dollars there. I would not start with health care. I do believe in priorities. I just happen to think that welfare aid to big corporations and aid to foreign governments and corporations, all these things, they could be cut first. But I don't think that's going to happen. So we have too much dependency. Even though I would still argue for the case of priorities, I don't believe it's coming. Matter of fact, I'm not too optimistic that we're going to come to grips with this. I think we're heading for a financial catastrophe.
Tonight on the docket, a libertarian hero, a champion of the Constitution, and a stalwart of limited government. He wants to bring the troops home now and end America's involvement in 5 bloody, expensive, and immoral wars across the globe. He wants the government to live within its means and not borrow one more penny to pay back its bills. He's sick and tired of all the money printed and perpetrated by the Federal Reserve that's literally stealing money right out of your bank account. And he wants to end the Fed. And if this champion of personal freedom were able to persuade Congress and the American people of the virtues of limited government, and that it's the only moral and practical solution for a free people and a free society, guess what your income tax bill would be? 0. And with the added bonus that your children won't be on the hook to pay for unconstitutional and unconscionable government welfare and warfare programs that took place long before they were born. Sounds like a great campaign platform to me. And that's why it's great news to hear that he's formed an exploratory committee to run for the Republican nomination for president in 2012. George Washington once said that liberty, when it begins to take root, is a plant of rapid growth. Our first guest tonight is living proof of that. Here now, Texas Republican Congressman. Who else could I be introducing this way but Ron Paul? Congressman Paul, it's a pleasure. Welcome here.
Thank you.
Why do you want to be president of the United States?
Well, it's a pretty good question, because there are days when I'm not sure that's exactly what I want in my life. Because I've said seriously, even though it might sound a little bit different than the others, actually I want to be president, not for the things I want to do, for the things I don't think we should do. Because I don't want to be a president that continues the policing of the world. I don't want to be a president that wants to run your life, and I don't want to be a president that's in charge of the economy. So in a way, it's a negative reason to be president, and that is to influence the society to accept responsibility and show that a president in the executive branch of government shouldn't be king. We don't need a president that is king, and I think that's my main goal, is to show that liberty works and big government doesn't, so therefore I would want to have less power, not more power.
The Constitution says that only the Congress can declare war. But presidents, not just this president, virtually all of his predecessors, at least in the post-World War II era, right, have acted as if they are kings or maybe princes by taking military into harm's way without seeking the permission of the Congress. How bad is that? How wrong is that for contemporary peoples and for the future when the Congress lets the president get away with that?
Yeah, and I like the way you put it. Why does the Congress let them do that? How did we get here? Why did we give up, the Congress give up their prerogatives, their responsibilities? That probably would baffle the founders, because I think they on purposely designed a system where the Congress would be superior to the other branches, yet now we're the most inferior branch. Our government's going to continue, you know, with us, without us, even if we're not there. So it is astounding, but it's just carelessness, but in a way indirectly it's with the people too. The people tolerate the congressmen who ignore the Constitution, right, and just let things go by. So we have drifted a long way away from the intent of the Congress to an intent of the Constitution to make Congress supreme in declaring when we send young people off to die. And this is both a big geopolitical event, but it's also a big financial event when we allow presidents to do this.
But the other thing that they have done, and they do this notoriously for all nations seem to have done this throughout history, that wars are almost always paid for by debasing the currency. If they weren't allowed and would not debase the currency, we would be prohibited from getting ourselves involved in so many of these no-win, nonsensical wars that we ought to stop and bring our troops all home. And this view is growing in popularity.
But what I'm referring to is the giving up of our empire. The Soviets literally gave up their empire. And we will, for financial reasons, we won't be allowed to have a presence in the Middle East. We won't be allowed to, we won't be capable of paying for the troops in Japan and Germany and doing all these things. And that, to me, will be good. We will draw back, take care of ourselves, take care of our borders, take care of producing wealth here, bring the jobs back, get taxes down low, and balance budgets, and that will be good. So yes, it will be reversed, but I do not foresee that the states will become independent, but more independent than they are now. They will not. They will have to give up the dependence on the federal government, and they will, because the federal government will be proven totally inept. They will have ruined our system.
What happened to the Soviet system? They were going to take over the world. The Soviet system collapsed because they had this weird foreign policy of reaching out and occupying territories and thinking that they could conquer Afghanistan. And then they would look and say, what did we do as a people? Oh, yes, we didn't learn a lesson. The British couldn't do it. The Russians couldn't do it. but the Americans can do it. We know how to occupy Afghanistan. We know how to do it. I tell you what, I really believe in the principle of spreading our goodness. But I tell you what, I do not believe our goodness is occupation by militarism and doing it with the use of force.
Do you believe spending cuts need to include the military as well? And if so, won't that be in direct conflict with the GOP agenda for resisting cuts to the armed forces?
Yeah, I guess some are deeply indebted to the military-industrial complex, but I'm sort of from the Eisenhower era where he and others warned about the military-industrial complex. I want a strong national defense, and if you waste money bombing places and then rebuilding them while our old country's falling down and our borders aren't protected, it's not going to work. So I think a growing number of not only Republicans, but a growing number of independents and Tea Party people realize that you can't say, oh, well, this cut spending for food stamps, but not for the military-industrial complex. That won't work, and I think that is really going to be the test. Since World War II, we've embarked in the wrong direction. We've been fighting all these wars and no declaration, so the war power issue is a key issue, and hopefully we can get to the bottom of it and not expand this power. But I think we get a pretty good idea about where the executive branch comes from, and I'm not so sure it would be unique for one party over the other. But the current office of the legal counsel to our president has said that it was necessary, it was okay to go to war to defend the credibility of the United Nations Security Council. I think that is an outrage. We're supposed to be defending the Constitution, not the not the United Nations Security Council. But this is not new. We did it in Korea. We ignore it sometimes, and now we ignore it in Libya. The War Powers Resolution, which was set up in '73, was supposed to curtail this. Technically, it was deeply flawed, but it actually legalized war for 60 days, which always drifts into 90, and even our presidents ignore that. So this is a mess, and you know, it's not all that complicated. Why do we complicate this for ourselves unless it's deliberate? Because we have a law. The law is called the Constitution. We're not supposed to go to war unless there's a declaration. We've been fighting this a long time, and the American people are sick and tired of it. It's draining us. It's draining us financially, and now we're into, how many wars are we in now? Afghanistan, Iraq, Pakistan, now Libya. We don't even know to the extent to how much we're involved in these countries. So we in the Congress demand, or should demand, our responsibilities again. It should be up to us when we go to war and not to the executive branch. Well, you know, I think of our problem more strategically than budgetary and tactical. You know, it's not an accounting problem, you know, waste and fraud and tinker here and cut a dollar here and dollar there. I think we have to decide what we want in our country, and I don't think we should be the policemen of the world. So we can go after the military budget. I don't even want to call it a defense budget because I don't think it provides defense. I want to cut the militarism that we pursue around the world, and that could cut hundreds of billions of dollars. I would go after the foreign stuff, and that's why I think the foreign policy is important. I think that we have a coalition of some Republicans and a lot of Democrats who think we spend too much money overseas and we shouldn't be expanding our wars. So that is a place where the American people should all join in. We're building an infrastructure in Afghanistan because we blew up Afghanistan and Iraq, and I think that's where we should really start to save. But you know, what I'm concerned about is this is not dealing with the problem, and it's a problem I've talked about for a long time. Our deficits are huge, and we depend on monetizing this debt. And when you do that...
Explain that for people. They're just sort of trying to get into the conversation.
Okay, both Republicans and Democrats really are responsible for this huge deficit financing. So if only the market could buy that debt, interest rates would go up and the Congress would have to quit spending. But the Fed comes in and buys it and keeps interest rates low. But eventually that turns into price inflation, in which I think you've observed already today a tremendous amount. Gold soaring again today.
I mean, look at all soft commodities. We'll all day long.
Yeah, and now that is a tax on the people. You know, literally the people are paying, their standard of living is going to go down. And I'm also predicting, and I think we've seen signs of it, interest rates are going to go up. And so this will make the budgetary argument of a few $billion nothing compared to the calamity that we're facing. And it's no easy task to get this under control.
At the same time, you seem to be among the very few people, Republican or Democrat, who's willing to come in at least to a public theater like this one and engage in a conversation about the actual problem, which is the you know, I don't know whether you want to call it inefficiency or corruption or manipulation, whether it's the tax code and the Swiss cheese there, the lack of real transparency and choice or competition in healthcare, the nature of our foreign policy, our banking system, our energy policy. These are the core issues that are laying the American people with debt. Why are there so few of you? Why is the debate not run by more people like you that are debating trillion-dollar issues that we actually have, as opposed to this pro wrestling we get with the nonsense on 30 billion from you or 50 billion from me?
Well, politically it's unpopular, especially if you'd been talking this way like I have for 10, 15 years when we should have been dealing with it. So this means you would have had to cut out the military-industrial complex and the special interests here at home. We have a system of corporatism. We don't have a system. Sometimes I don't like to condemn capitalism for the problems that we have today. But we have corporatism, and you know as well as anybody how the big guys got bailed out, and the little guys didn't get bailed out and compounded our problems. It wasn't the people who were giving us honest services and honest goods. It was the people who were ripping us off with the derivatives market, get into trouble, and then the taxpayers get stuck with that. That's what I resent.
Yeah, and they're still doing it.
Now, here's a guy who doesn't often backpedal, right or wrong. He's known for sticking with his positions. With me now is one of the Republicans who actually voted against Paul Ryan's plan, Texas Congressman Ron Paul. But this week, Congressman Paul announced he's setting up a presidential exploratory committee. So, Congressman Paul, why did you vote against the Ryan plan?
Well, it didn't cut anything. I mean, this noise that I just heard, this just is a representation of the bankruptcy of the country. And to blame Republicans is wrong. I think you have to blame both parties. You know, both parties have driven this country to bankruptcy. And just the noise and the screaming that you just released there is an indication of what's coming to our streets, because we won't admit what bankruptcy is. Sure, I'm concerned about people losing their medical care and all these problems, but believe me, the further bankruptcy of this country is going to be in everybody. The whole system is going to collapse, and that's what a dollar crisis is all about. So beware. This is only the beginning, and to say that one side is more guilty. Both sides have been spending too much. But the Democrats spend all this money on the welfare programs, and the Republicans spend all this money on warfare, and we're totally bankrupt. The dollar is crashing. There's inflation, and believe me, this is only the beginning. But if you don't understand why, you're in trouble, we're in trouble, you're not helping us to figure it out, because there is an explanation to this. The middle class gets wiped out when you destroy the dollar, and that's what you're seeing. The middle class is getting wiped out, and the corporations are ripping you off, but you're misleading the people by saying that somebody is trying to cut.
No, look, the dollar is an interesting question, and you know your views on the Fed are very interesting. You got something really great done in auditing the Fed. You worked with Alan Grayson, and I've given you credit for that over and over. But look, that was not the issue here. You said people are angry about bankruptcy. No, those people were very specifically angry about the possibility of their Medicare being cut. And when you look at the national polls, no, hold on now. You look at the national polls, people are very strident on this. You've got 76% saying that Medicare cuts are unacceptable. You've got 67% saying Medicaid unacceptable to cut. Social Security 77% to cut. I mean, doesn't that show you that people are justifiably angry about this and they don't want to cut?
Oh, yeah, they are, but they have to understand why, and I think you're misleading them. I'm concerned, too, but it's going to get worse if we don't understand this. Now, my own personal opinion is that most of this stuff is all unconstitutional, all that, but that's not going to come about because we don't live in that age. But if we made common sense out of this, yes, I would cut all this militarism and not cut people off from medical medical care. But what's happening now is, since there will not be a consensus, there's an agreement in Washington. You vote for welfare, we vote for military. And it continues, and we keep printing this money. But the problem isn't that somebody getting something cut short on Medicare. It's the ending of it. It's the ending of the program. You have to understand, when the dollar goes, there's nothing left. There's runaway inflation. And now, this was the whole thing about the Bernanke hearings today. He admitted, you know, that there's inflation coming, and it's there, and there's not a lot he can do about it except print more money, and the dollar was further devalued. And that's the key issue.
I have massive issues with Ben Bernanke. I have massive issues with Tim Geithner, who are Republican leftovers from the Obama administration, which is a Democratic administration, has taken on for reasons that no one can really fathom. So I agree with your points on that. But you're running for president, and you just said Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security are all unconstitutional. So if you become president, would you phase those programs out?
Well, you have to start where you are. I think it's all going to end, and it's not going to end because of me or anybody else. It's going to end because of the bankruptcy. So, but I have an idea of what we can do. I would cut massively on this overseas spending, hundreds of billions of dollars, and work our way out of it. But no, you can do this. I mean, when I go to the college campuses and I get large crowds out, I say, do you think you're going to get anything out of Medicare and Social Security? They say, no. I says, I'd let you out. Just get out of the program. Opt out.
So you would
restore your freedom, demand your rights to take care of yourself, and then take care of the elderly who are dependent. Don't put them out in the streets. And then you could do that, and you could work a transition. But there's a way you can have a transition.
So I just want to get clarity. Transition. So if you became president, you would transition completely out of Social Security and Medicare.
Well, you know, if I can get the people to agree and the Congress to agree, yeah, that would be my program, is to transition out, because this one has failed, and you're going to have riots in the streets. The food riots will come. They're all around the world, because this is a worldwide phenomenon. That's why the governments are breaking down around the world, because prices are going up. Because we have the reserve currency. Everything is based on the dollars. Other countries are already suffering, and it will come here. So you have to make a choice. You want to continue this and argue over where the cuts are coming, or are we going to get together and make some cuts? I'm just suggesting that the most popular way, political way, even though most Republicans disagree with me, is I would cut the military and the overseas spending and quit pretending we can run the world, because we can't. And then we could have a transition, and the young people know this. This is why I get support from the young people. They're willing to take care of themselves, and we don't have to throw anybody out in the streets, and we don't have to get rid of Medicare. But Medicare will be destroyed if the two sides don't get together and say, we got to get our house in order. You just can't spend your way out and borrow the money and print the money. That is total destruction to our whole system.
Congressman Ron Paul, I agree with you on militarism as well. That's why you're a very interesting person to have in the House of Representatives.
Every single day I read another story about the encroachment of the federal and state governments on our personal liberties, and I get sick and tired of it on what they're doing. And if you disagree with me on that, why don't you take a flight on an airplane? You might find out what it's like.
And that brings us to the topic today of airport security. Enough is enough. That's what Congressman Ron Paul is saying. And it's more and more what Americans are feeling about intrusive airport scans and gropes. Listen to Congressman Paul's impassioned plea on the floor of the House of Representatives.
What we're doing and what we're accepting and putting up with at this airport is so symbolic of us just not standing up and saying enough is enough. I know the American people are starting to wake up, but our government, those in charge, Congress as well as the executive branch, are doing nothing.
Congress as well as the executive branch are doing nothing, but America's foremost spokesman for liberty in the United States Congress, Texas Republican Congressman Dr. Ron Paul, joins us now. Dr. Paul, welcome back to Freedom Watch. It's always a pleasure. What can the government do? The public is in acute distress. The president has been virtually silent. The Congress, except for you, seems like it's still on vacation. What can we do?
Well, we should have done a lot less, a lot sooner. It would have been nice that they could have anticipated what it would be like if they created the TSA, where there were about 3 of us objected to that. But now, what do? Well, my suggestion is the first thing we should do is make sure there's no immunity for the people in the government doing things that are illegal for everybody else. And that's what my bill would do. That would be a step. But that's a long way off. How am I going to get the House to pass it, the Senate to pass it, and the President won't sign it? So that leaves it to the people. The people have to express themselves. And I'd have to say they're doing a pretty good job. And I would say not only the cables, but the Main Street media, give them credit. They're putting stuff out there, and they're showing the abuse. So it is waking up the American people. Sadly, it's slow. But I think we're making progress. I really think the people are getting annoyed. But I think a little bit of civil disobedience won't hurt. I mean, stand up to him and say, I've had this. He says, you can't make me do this, and see what happens. So I think opting out isn't the worst idea in the world.
Here's the problem as I see it. You know, a person can't fondle their neighbor when their neighbor comes onto their property. We don't have the right or the power to give that power to the government. How can the government do something that we can't do, that we never empowered the government to do it? As I'm discussing this with you, we're showing a film of a 6-year-old boy being stripped to his waist and touched by federal agents against the parent's will.
You know, and looking at this, and that's what motivated me the other day, was if this doesn't wake us up, what chance do we have to get them to bring our troops home and look at the Patriot Act and look at our foreign policy and do all the other things and look at the Fed? Those are big issues, too. But this one is in our face. If they can put up with it and say, oh, well, sacrificing a little bit of our freedom is necessary because we want to be safe. And you know the absurdity of that. If we want to be perfectly safe, we're going to have government cameras not only in our cars measuring everything we do and say, but in our houses, too. You know, we can prevent crimes in our houses. You know, every once in a while, kids get beaten and wives get beaten. So if we had a camera in the houses, we would prevent a lot of crime. So this goal of having perfect safety and that the government's responsible for it is a notion that has been growing too long. I hope we can use this episode with the TSA to show that that's not the responsibility of government. The responsibility of government is to protect our liberty.
Have you detected the view that you've just expressed amongst your fellow members of Congress? Because I wasn't kidding. We had John Micah on last week, a Republican who wrote the TSA Act 6 or 7 years ago, who said, we never intended this and we have to take this power back. We've heard you. The president said, oh, I talked to Janet Napolitano, but she tells me this is the only thing we can do. Congressman, Congress would never have written this law because they could never confront their constituents. This is a rule written by nameless, faceless bureaucrats. Question, are other members of Congress as animated about this as you are?
Well, I think a few are, but that it remains to be seen. But I just don't think that the enthusiasm is there. The people who created the TSA, well, we didn't intend it to do this. And like you say, it was done by regulators. But that's what happens all the time. Right. Do you think the Congress writes all the regulations of the IRS? Do they write them for the fish and wildlife and wetlands? But that's a derelict duty by the Congress. And, you know, the executive branch is not to write laws. They shall write no laws. It's only the Congress. Right. So it's that whole principle that's allowed this total out-of-control growth of the executive branch and judicial branch.
Does the federal government have any business, any authority, or any particular specialty in protecting private property?
Not the federal government. Matter of fact, I don't think of government as protecting private property. I think the Second Amendment protects your private property, and the government should protect your amendment, your rights, the private. And if somebody does invade your property, they can get involved. But you can't depend on the government. You know, Brinks does a pretty good job at protecting our money, but they own the trucks and they have their guards, and it's a secure truck. I don't know why that principle can't be applied to our airlines. They have a precious cargo. I've always argued, even from 9/11 on, that you know this country thinks more of their money. They allow the private sector do the good job protecting the money, but they won't let the private sector protect a precious cargo, the people.
And yet, you know, it was the government's failure before 9/11. Our federal government was in charge of security. We were spending $40 billion. It totally failed. So we doubled its budget and took away more freedoms from the American people. Then they wonder why it's not working very well. I mean, we need to wake up and wake up quickly. But what I'm afraid of, if they don't do it in a systematic, orderly fashion, people are going to wake up being pretty darn angry as our economy deteriorates. I think we could be in for big trouble. So that's why we need to wake up a lot more people. And hopefully this Tea Party movement has done part of this. So we'll see what happens next year, see if we come to our senses.
I think you have the phrase of the week this Thanksgiving week, Congressman Paul. Enough is enough. Thanks for joining us. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you.
You called for a WikiLeaks for the Federal Reserve. Something tells me that you differ with your colleagues who are calling for the prosecution of the WikiLeakers and agree with me and most of our viewers that it's a good thing for us to learn what the government is up to.
Well, in a free society, we're supposed to know the truth. In a society where truth becomes treason, then we're in big trouble. And now people who are revealing the truth are getting into trouble for it. But this whole notion that Assange, who's an Australian, that we want to prosecute him for treason, I mean, aren't they jumping to a wild conclusion? No, this is media, isn't it? I mean, why don't we prosecute the New York Times or anybody that releases this? I think Bradley Manley, you know, probably could say he's committed, you know, civil disobedience. But do we think of Daniel Ellsberg as being an enemy of the people? He was a friend of truth. I know still there's probably plenty that still don't like him, but isn't he the one that really gave us the concrete proof that Vietnam was based on a lie? And most people should know that Iraq and Afghanistan is all based on a lie, too.
And the Supreme Court said that he was authorized under the First Amendment to do so.
Mr. Speaker, Osama bin Laden applauded the 9/11 attacks. Such an act of deliberate killing of innocent lives deserves retribution. It is good that bin Laden is dead and justice served. Targeted retribution is far superior to wars of aggression and nation building. In 2001, I supported giving the President authority to punish those responsible for the vicious 9/11 attacks. Using this authority and opportunity to pursue nation building and remaking the Middle East was cynical and dangerous, as the past 10 years have proven. The sad tragedy is that it took 10 years, trillions of dollars, tens of thousands of American casualties, and many thousands of innocent lives to achieve our mission of killing one evil person. A narrow, targeted mission under these circumstances is far superior to initiating wars against countries not involved in the 9/11 attacks. This was the reason I emphasized at the time the principle of mark and reprisal, provided to us by the Constitution for difficult missions such as we faced. I'm convinced that this approach would have achieved our goal much sooner and much cheaper. The elimination of Osama bin Laden should now prompt us to bring our troops home from Afghanistan and Iraq. Al-Qaeda was never in Iraq, and we were supposedly in Afghanistan to get Osama bin Laden. With bin Laden gone, there's no reason for our presence in this region unless indeed it was all about oil, nation building, and remaking the Middle East and Central Asia. Hopefully bin Laden does not get the last laugh. He claimed the 9/11 attacks were designed to, number one, get America to spread its military dangerously and excessively throughout the Middle East, to cause political dissension within the United States. 70% of the American people now believe we should leave Afghanistan, yet both parties seem destined to stay. Number three, and to bankrupt America through excessive military spending as he did to the Soviets. The best thing we could do is prove bin Laden to be a false prophet. We must learn from this recent history. Tragically, one result may be the acceptance of torture as a legitimate tool for pursuing our foreign policy. A free society, calling itself a republic, should never succumb to such evil. Foreign aid to Pakistan, though bin Laden was safely protected for 10 years in Pakistan, should make us question the wisdom of robbing American citizens to support any government around the world with foreign aid. Our failed foreign policy is reflected in our bizarre relationship with Pakistan. We bomb them with our drones, causing civilian casualties. We give them billions of dollars in foreign aid, and she protects America's enemy number one, bin Laden, for a decade. It's time to consider a sensible, non-interventionist foreign policy as advised by our founders and authorized by our Constitution. We would all be better off for it.
In the last 2 days, you, along with at least one Democrat and a couple of other Republicans, have introduced legislation in the House of Representatives to terminate, not overnight, but in a militarily prudent way, our presence in Afghanistan, arguing, as you have, that with Osama bin Laden dead, with virtually no al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, the purpose of our going there 10 years ago has been served, and there's no purpose in staying. I think that argument is going to resonate with Republicans and with Democrats. What do you think?
Oh, yeah, and I think it's a lot easier, Judge. You know, when Clinton was pursuing some of these adventures, you know, Republicans objected. But when Bush did it, they didn't object. Now we're going to get more Republicans objecting to Obama. So I think it's just great that this is happening. And the resolution that we introduced, actually, it was very well planned. And Jim McGovern and Walter Jones deserves a lot of credit on this. They managed to get, I believe, 7 Democrats and 7 Republicans to make it a bipartisan. Getting the Republicans was more difficult than getting the Democrats, and we will get a lot more Democrats and more Republicans. But it came, really, we had been planning this for weeks, a long time before bin Laden was killed. But it really fit into our schedule just perfectly, saying, hey, declare victory and come home. Right. And I think a lot of Americans are thinking that way, because before bin Laden was killed, 70% of the Americans were saying, enough is enough. Let's get out of Afghanistan.
Congressman, before I let you go, what's the most important issue in this campaign to Ron Paul as you seek the Republican nomination and as you, if you get the nomination, seek the presidency?
The goal that I've always had in my political activity is for the preservation of liberty, and always pointing out that foreign policy, you know, war is the health of the state. You undermine liberties. When you believe in economic interventionism, you undermine personal liberties. And this idea that government can mold behavior, undermine personal liberties, that is my goal. It's a freedom philosophy.
The important question being asked today with regards to foreign policy is, should the United States impose a no-fly zone over Libya? There are leaders in both sides of Congress and leaders on both parties who are now advising this, as well as individuals in the administration. It is my opinion that we should not. It would be foolish. It would have a downside, and we should think very, very carefully before we go expanding the wars that we're already involved in. We're in 2 major wars with Iraq and Afghanistan, and that involves Pakistan and Yemen already. So to go into Libya now and impose a no-fly zone, we have to remember a no-fly zone is an act of war. Now, what moral right do we have to participate in war activity against Libya? Libya hasn't done anything to the United States. They're not a threat to our national security. There's been no aggression. There's no constitutional authority for a president to willy-nilly go and start placing no-fly zones over countries around the world. And, you know, we tried this in the 1990s and did it for 8 or 9 years. We had a no-fly zone along with sanctions and blockades around Iraq. And finally it ended up a war, and the wars were based on lies. And then when that happened, they said, yes, but it was well worth it because we got rid of a bad guy. But we also lost
close to 4,500 American military people, 30-some thousand severe injuries, hundreds of thousands applying now for disability, because we went to war when we shouldn't have gone to war. And to expand this war now makes no sense whatsoever. It's against international law. It challenges the War Powers Resolution. And for that reason, we should stop and think. Congress should act. I'm proposing to, preparing to introduce a resolution next week as a sense of Congress that the executive branch can't do this without approval from the Congress. Why should we do this? Do you think it'll cost some money? Yes, it's going to cost a ton of money. And it's going to have, innocent people will be killed. You can't just all of a sudden turn a switch and say, don't fly over Libya. You have to bomb a lot of anti-aircraft sites and a lot of military establishment. So the war is on. And from my viewpoint, this is the kind of thing that's been going on too long. It contributes significantly to our bankruptcy. And we are now spending approximately $1 trillion a year maintaining our empire around the world. We are in the process of remaking all the borders and leadership in Middle East and Central Asia, and now North Africa we get involved. We had invested $70 billion trying to prop up a dictator in Egypt, and look how that ended up. Now we're hustling around to find out who the next dictator is. So if we get involved, I'm not sure they even know who to bomb and why, which one, and who's going to come out on top. That is an internal matter. It's a civil war that's going on, and we can cheer for one side or the other, but that is not a justification to place the burden on the American people, both militarily and individualized as well as monetarily. Now, some would say that, yes, that sounds good, I agree with you that, but as long as we get approval from the UN and NATO, it'll be okay. But, you know, that's just really a cop-out. What Army and Air Force and technology does the UN have, and what does NATO have? You get a resolution to the UN and say, well, let's take out this bad guy and do these things, or NATO does it. They're all our airplanes, and they're all our money, and no matter what, anything and everything that goes wrong, the United States will be blamed for it. And there's enough resentment against us already for pretending that we can tell every other country how to live. The best way to look at this, I believe, is how would we as a people and how would we as a Congress respond if we were a weaker nation and there was a stronger nation, that they came and imposed no-fly zone over us, or had sanctions against us, or had a blockade. We wouldn't accept that. That would unify us. So I don't buy into this thing that this is the only humanitarian thing that we can do is expand the war. If we want to do something for humanity, we need a new foreign policy. We need a foreign policy that isn't built on militarism. It's built on more cooperation and more trade, and not picking our dictators. Look at what happened after we picked the dictator for Iran. It lasted, sure, 25 years or so, but eventually it radicalized the Islamists, and they had a revolution, and we came out on the short end of that. So I think it's time that we reassess this and think about a policy that makes a lot more sense, and economically we need to do it.
The president said we had to act in Libya. Is he right?
I think he's wrong. I mean, what are our interests and what are our values? Our values are defending the Constitution. Our interests are not served by starting wars. This is a preventive war. This is going in and saying, well, we're going to prevent something from happening, as if he knows exactly what would happen. And even if we did know exactly, where does the authority come from? You know, I have objected to these other wars that we have been pursuing, but this one might be a little worse because there wasn't even an attempt to come and inform the Congress and say this is what we're going to do. So I think we're taking one more step further with the Congress giving up its responsibilities and prerogatives and giving them over to the executive branch, and I don't like the trend.
Didn't Obama then, I hear your point, but didn't Obama really just take a page out of Bush's playbook, and didn't Bush take a page out of Reagan's playbook? This ain't the first time a president has done this.
Yeah, I think it's on and on. You know, Bush Senior and Junior did go to the Congress, even though I wasn't satisfied with that and voted strongly against it, not only because I thought the war was unwise, but I thought if you go to war, you're supposed to declare war and, you know, have a precise goal and a precise victory. So yes, it's a continuation of it, but this time some people would argue that it's slightly worse because he hasn't even made an attempt to get some type of token approval. And of course, I'm no fan of the United Nations. I don't think we should give up our responsibilities and our sovereignty to an international body to tell us when we should send young people off to war. And then on top of all this, some people actually bring up the subject of the cost of these things, and they're very, very costly. The whole thing is we don't have room to spend hundreds of billions of dollars overseas as we have been, while denying so many needs here at home.
Obviously, you oppose the president on going into Libya, but since we've been there for these 9 or 10 days now, has anything been accomplished to your liking at all?
No, I can't think of anything. You know, the more I see, the worse it seems to be. It's likely that there's al-Qaeda in the group who are rebelling, and once again, you know, we're all over the place. We were buddies with and allies with Osama bin Laden when we were fighting in Afghanistan in the 80s, so we may well you know, be serving the interests of the al-Qaeda. And actually the State Department hasn't denied this, and they said, well, sometimes you have to you know, make these type of partnerships when you're fighting an enemy. But who's going to make this choice on who's the worst person in the world? So, no, I think it's a bad move. I think it's bad for our national security and bad for our finances and bad for our Constitution.
Somebody said years ago that the first casualty in war is the truth. The very first casualty is the truth. I raised that because I was watching my friend Brian Williams last night on NBC News. Brian had an exclusive conversation with the president last night, so he sits with the president for about 10 minutes last night for this conversation, and the president suggests in that interview, as he did in his speech, that we've got Muammar Gaddafi on his heels. So the president says we've got him on his heels. After Brian finishes the interview, he goes to their foreign correspondent, Richard Engel. Engel is on the ground in Libya, and these guys are running faster than Jackie Joyner-Kersee trying to get away from Gaddafi. So the president says he's on his heels, but the story on the ground is these rebels are on the run. That's the story again in the news today. So who do you believe about these stories?
Well, I don't generally believe the government. That's a lot of wishful thinking. I don't know if it's outright lying, but it's wishful thinking and deception. But it is true. Our governments, the previous administrations, did it as well, and it's been going on for many, many years. You go all the way back to Vietnam. You know, lies were told to get us involved in these wars. So it is, American people should be much more reluctant. The Congress members ought to be more reluctant to accept this at face value, that, you know, it's the end of the world if we don't go in. You know, Saddam Hussein had nuclear weapons, and Al-Qaeda was in there, and all this fear-mongering. He was about to attack us, and they were all not, it was not true. So we should be much more cautious about going to war. I mean, it's just, you'd think we'd learn our lesson.
Now, with all due respect to the president, I can imagine that Republicans, particularly you got folk like John McCain and others, who are now calling for the president to help arm these rebels. I'll come back to that in just a second. The point here is that if the president did not do anything in Libya, when our values that we so cherish here are being stomped on in Libya, if he didn't do anything, wouldn't Republicans be saying the president sat on his hands and didn't go defend people when they were being annihilated by their government?
Oh, yeah, I'm afraid you're right, and there's still a bunch of them doing that. Why didn't you do more sooner? But we ought to question our values. Our values should be, you know, going to war in a proper manner and for a moral reason under the Constitution. So I don't know how you spread our values and for moral reasons to go and violate all the American principles that were embedded in our American system. So yes, you're absolutely right. There are a bunch. I think we're going to have more Republicans with us now in opposition to this. One, because things are getting out of hand, but also for partisan reasons. You know, this was happening in Bosnia. A lot of Republicans opposed Clinton. Clinton when he was going into Bosnia, but immediately when Bush did it, they were all for it. So I respect the people who are consistent, and we have a group, both Republicans and Democrats, more Democrats than Republicans, who take a principled stand. The progressive Democrats and some of the libertarian conservative Republicans are opposed to this type of foreign policy on principle.
I hear your point now, and obviously you're Republican and you've been very courageous on this war question for a while now, condemning these kinds of invasions, these kinds of wars. But since you mentioned progressive Democrats, there are a number of stories out all over the place now, and I, for one, am concerned about this myself, that the progressives have not been as vocal about this as they were about Bush going into Iraq. So is the progressive left hypocritical on this issue now?
Well, there are some that I was just shocked they weren't with us, you know, and they had been so strong allies when we were opposing the Iraq War, and then they just faded. But it sorts people out, and find out who the people are of principle. You know, the Dennis Kucinich group, I mean, they're still anti-war and very consistent anti-war, but then there are others that actually I was pretty disappointed. I just assumed they would be with us, and they have not been.
What do you think about where we are in the Middle East and our involvement?
Well, it's a continuation of a policy that's a very bad policy from my viewpoint for 50 years, ever since World War II, but every year it gets worse. Now we can go into Libya, start another war, be involved. Our CIA's in there. We use drone missiles. And the president is rather arrogant about it. He says, I don't need to ask the Congress for this. Where does he get the money to do this if he doesn't even need to come to the Congress and get the permission? So the wars are perpetual. They're done, you know, on presidential orders. And the Congress really just sits by and lets it happen. And this is connected to our financial crisis. Wars always are harmful and costly, and ultimately they bring down empires, and that's what we're on the verge of. We should look at recent history of what happened to the Soviets when they went in Afghanistan. We've been there 10 years. 70% of the American people say it's time to come home. And it's connected with even monetary policy. If you didn't have the Fed monetizing debt, you couldn't fight these wars because you'd have to tax people. You couldn't have runaway entitlement programs because if you didn't have the Fed buying up the debt, because interest rates would go up and the Congress would have to be restrained and quit the spending. So it's all connected to our economic problems, our foreign policy, entitlement system. So the Fed is the key to the financing of big government and the destruction of our personal liberties.
And they're talking about cutting some military spending, which I'm all for. Matter of fact, I wrote a letter along with some others to recommend this, and they've at least addressed the matter, and they talked about bringing a third of our troops that are stationed overseas. But they're liable to put them into Afghanistan, so I don't think these are real cuts. I just think they're dealing with this in an incorrect fashion. It's not strictly a budgetary problem. It's a philosophic problem, a philosophy of government. As long as we're going to be the policemen of the world, and as long as we pretend we're going to run a welfare state from cradle to grave, it's not going to work. And these figures, how can you rely on these figures? How do they know what the revenue will be? They don't even know what the employment rate will be in a couple years. So I'm not all that hopeful. They're not going to start anything until 2012. They're talking of a total $200 billion cut by 2015. I mean, what does that mean? Last year, the national debt went up $1.6 trillion. So I'm skeptical, but I'm for all the cuts they have there. I don't think I would vote against any cuts that they have suggested.
If you were to be able to set the North Star, however, for a conversation about not just the deficit, because the deficit obviously is symptomatic of a philosophical operating system in this country, not just at the federal government, but in the state government and all the rest of it, and for that matter, a financial system, a bond market that indulges the politicians' behavior. Where would you begin the process of correcting it if you think this is philosophically misguided?
Well, I would say that we should have a new foreign policy and bring all our troops home and defend our country and not police the world. See, I think we should look at the military-industrial complex. I think we should look at the empire, because that's unsustainable too. And there's a growing concern about that. And right now we're voting on the DOD budget, and there's a strong sentiment to say, you know, enough is enough. It's time that we start coming home. So, and of course, I told you where I would start. I would start with our military-industrial complex and the foreign policy and these very damaging wars.
Congressman, you disagreed with the Obama administration's decision to go into Pakistan and eventually ended up killing Osama bin Laden. You suggested that this is a violation of Pakistani territory, which it was, obviously, and that we would have been better off to have relied on the Pakistani government to arrest bin Laden and turn him over to us for trial. But given the contentious relationship we have with Pakistan, how would that have been possible?
Well, you know, the question that they asked me is whether it could have been done a different way, and I said yes, it could have been done. You know, when we dealt with Saddam Hussein, you know, we found him in a rat hole and we just didn't shoot him. You know, we captured him and tried him, and he got hung, and people know where he is. Right now, all we've done is raise some questions and fed the people who like conspiracy theories. But no, the relationship with Pakistan, it's an impossible situation. Here is a country that we worked with. George Bush worked with them, and we captured a lot of bad people that brought over. The people responsible for the first bombing of the towers, they became convicted and in prison, and we worked with them. But you say, well, we can't work with them anymore. But we keep bombing them. We kill innocent people there. How can we, at one time, take a country and pretend that we recognize that they're a friend, give them billions of dollars to do our bidding, at the same time, we kill people over there, and then the people resent this, and they turn against their whole government. I see the whole thing is a mess, and I think that we are going to be in Pakistan. I think that's the next occupation, and I fear it. I think it's ridiculous, and I think our foreign policy is such we don't need to be doing this. So when I talk about doing it differently, I talk about in the context of our foreign policy and not in the fact of whether or not we should have gotten them. Matter of fact, I voted for the first authority. I think what's the real tragedy is that we didn't get them 10 years ago when we could have and should have. And yet we now have spent $1 trillion. We've lost 5,000 people, our soldiers, in fighting 2 wars that had nothing to do with bin Laden. And to me, we have to reassess the foreign policy just like we have to reassess our economic policies here.
The implication of part of the answer that you just gave is that you feel that the Bush administration handled Pakistan better than the Obama administration has. Is that correct?
I think when we went after the bad guys, they cooperated with us. So why shouldn't you assume that they could do this again? But I also understand why the situation is much worse, and that's why you can't see this as an isolated incident. You have to look at this in the context of our foreign policy, why we are having difficulty. Yeah, I do think in some terms, of course, I was a strong critic of the foreign policy of George Bush too, because he missed the target in Afghanistan at Tora Bora, and he went off fighting a war in Iraq that we should have never fought. So no, but I just said that he was able to at least work with the security and the government of Pakistan, and we got a lot of bad guys over here. And I was just thinking, you know, the way Saddam Hussein was captured was quite a bit different. And I just think there's more questions now than ever. How many stories have we heard already about the killing of bin Laden? Yeah. I mean, people are supposed to know what their government's doing. And if you ask me exactly what happened, I have no idea, because I've heard so many stories. And I don't know if anybody there on your panel knows exactly what happened on day when he actually died and when they got the DNA evidence and when he was dropped. I mean, I just think that people need to know more about their government.
I do not have any information on that.
Willie, you
sorry to report.
You don't know. Nobody knows. So,
but that's a conspiracy theory that you
that's
just
what
sort
I
of
feel like just happened. Did you just put out a conspiracy theory, Congressman Ron Paul?
No.
I think what the inept policy invites people to think about conspiracy theories because we don't get all the evidence, and I think that's where we are now. I think there will be plenty of conspiracy theories because we're presented facts that we're changing almost on a daily basis.
Congressman, it's Willie Geist. I just want to follow up on something you said a minute ago, that you suspect Pakistan will be the place the United States occupies next. Do you have information on that, or that implies there'll be some sort of invasion?
No.
Or why do you say that?
Just because I look at what has happened in the past 30 or 40 years of all the unintended consequences and what we have done and how we are spreading and the attitudes that has been pervasive in our government for the past 10 years, that we have this obligation to spread our goodness and protect our financial interests. And right now, Pakistan is a big problem. And the people there, we have created a civil war there. And the fact that we go over there and we violate their security, and the people rebel against the government because they see their government as being a puppet of the American government. So it's total chaos, and I am afraid, I hope I'm absolutely wrong, but I'm afraid we will be in Pakistan trying to occupy that country, and it will probably be very unsuccessful.
Governments like secrecy. They're not, you know, whether it's the Federal Reserve or our foreign policy, just think how many times we've gone to war by distortion of the evidence, you know, and lie our way into war, whether it was World War, whether it was Vietnam War, or you know, going into Iraq. I mean, they have to, you know, deceive us. And then when the people distrust the government, then any questioning government is called a conspiracy theory, you know, and they do that to say that, oh, you're nuts, because everything is a conspiracy. But I think the best thing is you should only believe the conspiracies that are true, you know. Of course there's a conspiracy, people getting together and thinking, how are we going to manipulate the money supply? But in an intellectual way, those of us who think that we should have a different system, you know, we sit around and talk, so we conspire, and that's, use the word loosely, we conspire on how we're going to change the world and how we're going to get more people to understand economics. So, but it's almost like, why is the government so stupid? If they don't like the conspiracy theaters, why do they set the stage for them?
Speaking of conspiracies for freedom, when I first started studying the monetary policy issue, it seemed to me like there was a showdown coming as the dollar collapses between those who want to move to a global fiat currency and those of us who want freedom in monetary policy. And now just recently we had George Soros with his meeting at Bretton Woods several weeks ago. And then I go back to the 80s when you started this championing this cause for sound money, for getting away from the Federal Reserve System. Do you think that showdown is coming anytime soon?
I think the showdown's inevitable because fiat money doesn't last forever, and it will end. But there's no way to know which month it will occur, or which year. When I talked about the financial bubble before and the housing bubble, I didn't know what month it would be. It could have been a year sooner or a year later. In the same way with the monetary crisis, because there's a confidence factor in there. As long as it seems like our dollar is working and they're still taking our dollars, China's been willing to take a lot of our dollars. They've had well over $1 trillion, but they're not taking them this amount. They're shrinking their portfolio now of dollars. So, but there's no panic, and they shrink their portfolio slowly and quietly because they don't want to panic, because if you panic out of the dollar crashes. But I think eventually there will come. The end stages of a currency goes rapidly. I think the best thing for the average person to look at will be prices. Whether their grocery shopping is getting too expensive, and how much it costs to fill their tank of gas up, how much it costs for their medical care and transportation. These are the kind of things. And when it starts to lower their standard of living because their salaries can't keep up, that is the beginning of a serious crisis. I think we're there. Now, how rapidly it will move in the next 12 months or so, I can't say that. But my guess is that by November next year, the main topic won't be bin Laden. The main topic is going to be how come I'm getting poorer and poorer, and why did Wall Street rip us off because they were too big to fail, and why do they continue to make huge profits? At the same time, unemployment stays very high, and the people who lost their houses haven't gotten their houses back again. I think that'll still be the major issue next year.
I do think it's easier to cut overseas spending, politically speaking. I think I can make the case that we should bring our troops home, change our foreign policy, quit these ridiculous wars. We would be safer and richer for it, and that's my argument. I think I could actually sell that politically easier than saying, oh, okay, let's cut medical care for the elderly. You know, that doesn't make any sense to me.
Take, for instance, the war issue. I take a position which is not the conventional issue for the Republicans. But 70% of the American people are sick and tired of the war, and they want us to come home from Afghanistan.
First is, How would you get us out of the war? Because it seems to be an answer that has eluded everyone. How do we get out? That's what I mean. I would like to know, because I would like to get out, but I'd like to. I'd like to get out of all of the wars, you know, because our kids are. But how? Do you have
I don't think it's complicated. Okay. How did we go in? We just marched in without permission, without a declaration of war. So a good president would just march home. They would just leave.
Well, you know, to be fair to you, you said this about George Bush's war in Iraq also. You're very consistent.
Both parties are war parties. Let's face it. That's what we have to admit.
Why? Because it increases the economy.
Well,
it's good for
I don't know why. I don't know. It might even be a conspiracy, but it seems like the military-industrial complex controls both parties, because a lot of weapons are sold, and you always have to have an enemy. Think how many weapons have been sold already just bombing Libya. How many dollars do we have to spend getting more drones to drop bombs on Pakistan? But it's both parties. That's why the people have to wake up. If they're tired of war, and they will eventually get tired of war, they're getting that way. But it'll be financial. Most empires end when they go into a financial crisis, and we're in the middle. We're starting it. I mean, we've had the bursting of the financial bubble. Now we're about to go into a dollar crisis. I don't support most programs because most programs are, as far as I'm concerned, technically unconstitutional. Unless I see the authority there, just I address it like I address the war issue. Don't go to war unless it's a declared war, and the president can't do it. Well, I look to Article 1, Section 8, and I look for my authority, and if it's not there, I don't do it. And that's why I have to vote no a lot. You don't have a right to things and services. You have a right to your life. You have a right to your liberty. And if you want good medical care, or if you want a healthy economy, you have to have a free market economy with sound money and good contract laws, and then there'll be great prosperity. But we have a system of corporatism now where business and governments are partners, and they rip us off, whether it's the military-industrial complex. In medicine today, both parties promote a form of medicine delivered by corporations, big drug companies, insurance companies, and that's why we have lousy care.
If the Republicans and the interventionists are going to keep the war policy going, and the Democrats in the Senate are not going to cut Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, we're going to have the third straight $1.4 or $1.5 billion deficit. How long do we go forward with these kinds of deficits before you have some international crash?
Well, I think we're on the verge of it, and actually the national debt goes up faster than the deficit. So we were 1.7 last year, $1 trillion increase in the national debt. No, the timing is unpredictable, as most of us should realize, but the inevitability of continuing this kind of spending will lead to the crisis. And of course, I argued that this was the setting of the stage for many, many years, maybe decades, that we had embarked on this. And this should bring us all together. I mean, all spectrums, if they care about their country, that we ought to be talking about it. You know, I have worked with the progressives, and I can get a lot of them to agree that deficits aren't that good, and they might want to balance the budget differently, but they know deficits are bad. And I think that, you know, the foundation has been totally eroded out of the monetary system. It's the worst conditions this world has ever seen, because it's based on a fiat standard which is worldwide, and because of the internationalization and the communications we have today, it is worldwide. It's a worldwide bubble with these fiat currencies. Very, very vulnerable, and one day it's going to break loose, and maybe it could be next week, next month, or next year, but it will come, and people have to realize that. So when people say, oh, we can't cut this and we can't cut that, what if they knew that if in a year from now there would be nothing functioning because the dollar doesn't work? That is much, much worse.
It seems that there is no difference between Republicans and Democrats when it comes to these wars. In fact, Barack Obama's tripled the number of troops in Afghanistan, and Republicans are pushing him to commit even longer. We've been there for over a decade, Ron.
Yeah, and this is the bad part of bipartisanship. Foreign policy is always bipartisan. And, you know, give Obama his due, because he didn't deny that he wanted to fight in Afghanistan. That's the good war. That's the long war. And he did state that in the campaign. But he has no intention of leaving. And we have no intention of leaving Iraq until we totally go broke, and we have to leave like the Soviets did. Our empire will end for financial reasons, but it is total chaos. there is no stability in Iraq. I mean, today there was an article, I think in the New York Times, the last Christians about to leave there. As bad as it was before, this is the first time in the history of Christendom that the Christians had to leave Iraq. I mean, it is horrible, and there's no peace there. And Iraq and Afghanistan is getting worse. The war is spreading into Pakistan, and there's more than just Obama. There's somebody that designates what foreign policy is all about, regardless of the party. So whether it's the Federal Reserve and monetary policy, whether it's the foreign policy or the welfare spending, there's way too much bipartisanship because philosophically both parties endorse these positions, and now there's nobody capable of backing off. So that's why we're going to have the bankruptcy before we come to our senses.
How do you balance the budget, and how short a time do you think you can do it? And do you think the country would be ready to say, okay, we're going to give up Social Security and Medicare and all these other things? Because I believe you would support that.
Yeah, we would. I don't think anybody could get that through because I think we'll have an economic collapse and then we'll have to start over again. That's a bigger story. But if we had our ability to do it, I would address one subject that we agree to disagree on, and that is I would cut a lot of this spending overseas. I mean, we have too much stuff, and why do we support Obama going into Libya and all this stuff? It's just way too much. You could cut a lot.
Do we have a war on terror, though? Is that real in your mind?
Yeah, but you have to understand where the terrorism goes. I know Michael Schur comes on Fox at times. I don't know whether you've had him on there. Sure. I read him very seriously. I consider him the most intelligent person and most knowledgeable person about Osama bin Laden. And he has a new book, you know, out of that. So I think looking at that means that our foreign policy does have something to do with our problems and our dangers that we face here. But I don't see that.
Well, when you say that, I think people interpret that we incite the attacks against us. The conclusion of the 9/11 Commission was they were at war with us, but we're not at war with them.
Yeah, but the 9/11 Commission also recognized that there was a blowback phenomenon. The fact that we were over there and had a base in Saudi Arabia was part of it, and Osama bin Laden said that, and we immediately after 9/11 removed the troops from Saudi Arabia. We closed that base down. But the 9/11 report recognized that.
But if they were at war with us for a decade and we're not at war with them, do you not agree that there is a desire among Islamic extremists to have an Islamic caliphate, Sharia law, and conquering the world? Because that's their stated goal.
Yeah,
I mean, that's what they say they want.
But I think there'd be this many, but because we're over there, their numbers grow. That is what you have radicals in all religions, and if there's some way to incite them, their numbers will grow. Right. So their numbers have grown, but they use us to do that, and they say, "Oh, they're over here. We support all these."
I think
dictators.
they hated us. You said about the Ground Zero mosque issue that you thought that this was a religious freedom issue. And I have a real problem when the families, and you said, you know, you were raising the question about who's, you know, raising the question just why and what's driving the people that were opposing it. Now, if we look at Imam Rayouf, guy that wants America to be Sharia compliant, that thinks Osama bin Laden is made in the USA, that we're partly responsible for what happened, you're not concerned about the families of 9/11 and their reaction after losing their loved ones?
But I'm also concerned about guilt by association and blanket guilt by a group. And if that goes through and you say you can't do it because it's Muslim and there were some bad Muslims over here and they did this, this means you blame the religion. And you don't want to blame the religion, but in order to do that, I mean, if something happened that it had been a Catholic or something like that did it, would you think, oh, that's a good idea? We don't want, because he was a Catholic and he did bad things and therefore we can't allow a Catholic church to be built in a certain area.
But when I listen to you, I hear you talk about first founding principles, which, by the way, are really important. And I think that's the area that I would find an agreement with you. The difference is that the imam, while we believe in free speech, believes in a value system. When he says he wants America to be Sharia compliant, it's the antithesis. Wait a second. This is important. It is the antithesis of everything we believe in. Women don't have rights. They don't drive. They get stoned to death. They need 4 male eyewitnesses if they're raped. They don't get to go to school and work.
But that's not coming here. We have to
stay that's what he said he wants.
That's what we have to do is defend our principles. And actually, the principle here is a private property principle. We shouldn't have governments building buildings and telling people where to build. It should be a private property issue. If you own that that land over there, you shouldn't be told what you can build on there. And if you want to rent it to any type of religion, you should be able to. And you can't have guilt by association.
It's not guilt by association. The words of this guy on 60 Minutes that if somebody wants America Sharia compliant, Sharia by its very nature as applied, is one that denies women rights.
But that's a different issue entirely. I mean, that goes on in Saudi Arabia, but he wants
that in America, is what he said.
I know.
So he's fighting for that.
But then you defend it by a better idea. You defend it by the Constitution. They can't do that.
By opening the door, isn't that opening the door for somebody who wants to overthrow America into a system that that is contrary to our fundamental beliefs?
I think you're closing the door on what makes America great: property rights and the fact that you don't have people guilty because they belong to a group. And you don't have everybody guilty because of something horrible that has happened.
Later this morning, we will be debating and voting on 2 resolutions dealing with Libya. The first one, H.J. Res 68, has been said to be one that literally endorses exactly what the president has been doing, and I agree with that. Even though it excludes ground troops, it doesn't talk about special forces, CIA, contractors, and unlimited bombing, which is really what we have to restrict. But the second one, H.R. 2278, has been said to be more strongly worded in restraint on the president, and this is where I disagree. I believe the wording is different, and it says no funds for ground troops, but then it has exceptions, and the exceptions are for all the things that we're already doing. So I believe if we vote and pass the second one, it will be the first time this Congress has given authority to the president for what he is doing right now. So I urge my colleagues to look at both of these carefully. I have concluded that not only should the first one be voted down, but it's very important that the second one be voted down as well. I have a lot of complaints about how we deal with the issue of war. This is a debate that should have gone on 4 months ago before the war was started, and if we'd have done this properly, we wouldn't be bringing this up quickly. No committee work, no discussion, no chance for amendment. But nevertheless, I will support the rule because at least we get a chance to talk a little bit about what's going on in Libya. We have 2 resolutions that will come up under this rule. The first resolution, generally I understand most individuals aren't too keen on this because it's a literal endorsement. It's a rather explicit endorsement of the war, and I obviously would be opposed to H.J. Res 68. But my greatest concern is about H.R. 2278. Because the way I read this resolution is that it essentially grants the same authority that we grant in the first one, because we say that, oh no funds can be used, deny the use of funds, but how can you deny the use of appropriated funds when they're using funds that weren't appropriated? It's so redundant. The funds were never appropriated, so yes, it's a good statement. No funds, you don't continue to be illegal is what we're saying. But what I'm concerned about are the exceptions. All the exceptions are for the things that they're doing, you know, like search and rescue, intelligence gathering, renaissance, surveillance, refueling, operations planning, and doing everything except pulling the trigger. So we're legalizing that. I believe that H.R. 2278 is the first time that we in the Congress are making a statement that we are granting authority to the president to pursue this particular war. So I am in strong opposition to that resolution as well, although I understand the other side of the argument because it says denial of funds. But, you know, the resolution actually says that, you know, the main reason, the author of the resolution said, the reason why we have the exception is to protect the integrity of our contract or agreement with NATO. Well, in the resolution said we have to stop the funding because we don't want to support NATO's war. So it's totally inconsistent, makes no sense whatsoever, but it reminds me of the War Powers Resolution. You know, after the Vietnam War, we didn't want to get into that kind of war anymore, so they come along to Congress, and it's infinite wisdom with great, good intentions, designs the War Powers Resolution, which legalized war for 90 days. That's part of the reason why we're here. We're worrying about 90 days, but here we're going into the 4th month dealing with the War Powers Resolution. There's a simple solution to all of this, and that is obey the Constitution, don't allow our presidents to go to war without a declaration of war, and we wouldn't be facing this problem of this debate that actually gets a little bit silly. on restraining the president. Yes, we should. We should exert ourselves. We have the prerogatives. We have the obligations.
Time has
and we
expired.
have avoided it. It's time to stand up for the rule of law.
All right. Well, let me tell you something. You've got so much support out there, and people want to know where can they go to get more information, because you are a big-time contender for the 2012 presidential election. So where should they log on to?
Ron Paul 2012.
There you go. As simple as that. See, this guy just tells it like it is. Fantastic. Congressman, always a pleasure. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Well, I hope as you go forward and get into debates with more of these neocon chicken house draft dodgers that you remind them that you're the candidate with the troops on your side. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good to be with you.